Hello, everybody. Real quick, just want to go through our sponsors, forpatriots.com. They have this week's specials, buy one, get one on a 4-week food supply, and generators, buy one, get one. Each includes a free solar panel with it. Um, awesome prices. So it's almost like getting 50% off. You get two for the price of one. And on EMP Shield, specials are I offer 50% off using my link in the description, and on the site you also get for if you buy more than one EMP shield, you get anywhere from $20 to $200 off. So with that said, let's get into our intro. We'll start our show.
What if everything you see, hear, and believe is part of a carefully crafted lie? A deception not of nature, nor of chance, but of purpose. Woven by entities far older than any written record, older than civilization itself. They have watched empires rise and fall. Kings and tyrants, mere puppets in a grand theater of control. Their presence? Rarely seen, yet undeniable. From the dawn of man, they have whispered into the ears of rulers. Orchestrated wars. Manipulated economies. Mold society to fit their unseen agenda. Media. Finance. Politics. Education. They control it all. And yet, they remain hidden. We have glimpsed their presence in myths, sacred texts, whispered rumors passed down through generations. Some call them gods. Others, rulers from the shadows. But their true nature remains elusive. Tonight, we will attempt to tear through their veil. We will attempt to expose the ancient ones who have always been here. Who they are. What they want. And why they never leave. Welcome to Lifting the Veil. Our world is a carefully constructed matrix.
All right, everybody, welcome. Looks like our Rumble stream, for whatever reason, didn't start, but we are streaming here on YouTube and on BitChute. BitChute is working like a charm. That's crazy. So I don't really have too many announcements tonight before we start the show. I do have quite a bit to go through tonight, and please bear with me. Once I get to the share screen, I've got so much to go through. I even have some video clips. It helps me from having to explain it. And I think you all noticed the new intro that I'm kind of working with now. I actually have voice to text working so that I don't have to read it, because after a couple of years being off camera, I'm still kind of getting used to being back on, losing that stage fright. Anyway, so tonight we're just going to try bringing this all together into one fully integrated, seamless package. So tonight's show is going to weave together ancient entities, rewritten history, lost civilizations, suppressed technologies, biblical and Sumerian connections, the mud flood, and the flood of the Bible. And then we're going to talk about the controllers of the worlds and of the world and what is their end game. All right, so I'm getting the YouTube chat in. Hey, Patriot Roy D, he's one of our moderators. Glad you're here. All right, so on our first narrative, the hidden hand of time, opening the veil of deception. So this is something that I kind of said to people, for over the years. It's like, what if everything we know, our history, our origins, everything that's gone on in our world is a carefully crafted lie? From the dawn of human civilization, entities older than recorded history have shaped our reality from the shadows. I'm going to start a media share here, get everything lined up. All right, so I'm not saying that this is what these guys look like, but they look pretty demonic to me, if you ask me. But I think that's the forces that are um, controlling our world. They're unseen in the background, um, and they've got their puppets, whether they're, and we'll talk about how people and rulers of countries can become puppets a little bit later. But these are basically from the dawn of human civilization, probably older than recorded history. We're talking pre-Adamic and before the Sumerian texts. So this could go much further back than we all realize. I just kind of got into a rabbit hole and it got deeper and deeper. So what I'm going to start out with, there's another video clip here. It's a gentleman by the name of David that was on the confessionals the other day going through some issues, whether it be demonic or other things. But what they found with this person was that a soul fragment from another human was stored in their body, and he found this out during deliverance. And it's a pretty amazing thing here. So why don't we take a look at that, and then we'll move on.
I'm part of the secret space program. I'm very, very important to certain missions. And so they took me out. My body died, but they stored me inside of here. And they will basically abduct me out of this body, which was my client's body. I'll do my operations or whatever, and then they'll store me back inside of here. Ooh, that's probably not where Jesus. She accepted Jesus from the inside of my client's body and went with him. God is good. They're like, I'm going to tell you the juice, like the real tea. And I was like, spill the tea, friend. She was like, these people are working to tear down the restrainer. Like that is totally part of the secret space program operation. They're working with all of these different groups to do it. There's a lot of trade on all these technologies, like these technologies entering that the memories of the soul fragment of the person that was stored in my client bled through, and my client was starting to encounter these memories. And we're like, I can't reconcile these memories to my lived experience or any of the parts that I know belong to me, like, or my trauma. I don't understand this. It's like, well, yeah, because those memories were actually the memories of another human, but because of this soul trade and soul swapping, now you're getting memories of another person.
Okay, so on this reincarnation, soul swapping, soul fragments, all this stuff, right? Now, you're talking about people having spirits that are older than the body and the soul.
Yep.
Would that be considered reincarnation?
Well, no, but I would call it incarnation, not reincarnation. So the spirit has all this lived experience through what I believe are actually many ages. And then from Adam to now, that spirit will get one official incarnation in this world, complete with a human soul and a human spirit.
Which is why you said, I think it was in Jeremiah, that I knew you before you were in mother's womb. And when we read that, people think, I think traditional thought is, I had you in mind.
Yeah.
But it's, I knew you. You and me knew each other before you were incarnate.
So that's pretty amazing. So that explains how people can be made to do things that they probably normally wouldn't do. They take other people and they're either terrorized or they MK Ultra or whatever you want to do to them. They traumatize this person to the point where it fragments their soul and little pieces of their soul, and they can come in using this technology, which is like going from way back, whether it be the angelic or wherever it came from. But I think it was stuff that came from the fallen angels. They knew how to do this. They could do it. They had the technology, and they pull this out and they insert it in somebody else, and that could be maybe not like demon possession, because it's not actually a demon that's going in, but it's somebody else. And this, just like this other person, their original body was dead. So this soul fragment was being kept alive or stored in another human's body and being used to do these missions supposedly with the secret space program. So interesting stuff. So this next clip, this is on where they're talking about Nephilim bloodlines are the best hosts. And it gets a little graphic, but again, this is going to like start painting the picture for things as we kind of move forward in the show. So this again is with Tony Merkel on the confessionals with his guest Nathan, who's been on a couple times. This guy, I've watched the shows a number of times just because what this guy has to say just totally amazes me. So here we go with Tony and Nathan.
There's these understandings of what the watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of, and that's why they're perishing. It's because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaschizmadzotoi in the Greek in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan, you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic. And all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, like most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down where they are consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I've physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body, and this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to extend their life force.
Okay, so that kind of went into on another way of possession and how they can take control of people. So either by soul fragments or by certain ways of getting demonic, either demonic influence or even as far as demonic possession with these people, and that's what's happening there. Just some crazy stuff. So we see that these people or these entities that kind of control our world today, they erase timelines, they've rewritten narratives, they've manipulated rulers to ensure their control remains unseen. And when we talk about controlling the rulers, is kind of what they do. It's a lot of these people that are picked, and I call it picked, not voted in, or it's because they're of a certain bloodline that they become a king or a queen or a ruler of some type. But all these people are chosen. We found that out in the past couple of elections where we were talking about that they were selected, not elected. Okay, so that's what's really happening, is these people are selected over time to fit in certain places. And for all we know, and what we know of these entities, those entities could be the very ones that have a piece of them in the human that's controlling them. That's their puppet strings. That's what's controlling them. So We kind of talk about the Bible, Sumerian text, and historical evidence, and hint at pre-Adamic civilization. So one that possessed advanced technology beyond what mainstream history acknowledges, and we're finding it bit by bit, buried under layers of mud. Okay, so we go back this we look at back in the day of the technology, what with the pyramid. We look at the pyramids and all of these big buildings, the cathedrals. We're going to get into that and what some of these buildings really were and what they were actually, what their function was. And they've all, I think a lot of them have been repurposed for the opposite of what they were actually meant to be. Okay, so um, now we're going to talk. This is going to go back to Tony and David, um, with the confessionals and talking about a pre-Adamic army general. So that's what David was back then. His soul, okay, is what he found out in a roundabout way. I don't have the whole information in this clip on how that came about. You'd have to watch the episode. It's definitely an attention grabber. But here's a clip from that talking about the pre-Adamic army and their battle against the occult.
Coming back to the pre-Adamic conversation, it's like, no, the cross of Jesus Christ is more profound than we understood. I went through all this emotion, right? Coming back to my story, and it was like, whoa, what is this? Then I went through several phases of awareness, like when I began to understand my own pre-Adamic experience. In the pre-Adamic age, I was actually a type of general. I was very involved with the military operations of heaven, fighting on the side of Yahweh, God. That was just my role. And as evidence of that, and this came from someone else, I actually remember there was a time where I was ministering to a certain survivor, and there was an angel. It was actually the way that this one worked. The angel was given a post, like kind of like a guardian angel, but it was sent in with the person to their life to help them survive all of the trauma connected with the programs and the projects. And then it started helping us to deprogram the person. And I thought it was an altar at first. And then it was like, no, this is actually an angel and it's on assignment. And it said one day, are you starting to remember? I don't know what you mean by that, angel. Like, what am I supposed to remember something? He was like, I was in your armies. And I was like, no, I got nothing for you. But what later came out was, before this person was born, this angel that came and was interacting with my human spirit as part of these heavenly armies was given an assignment with this person's life, who came in like 30 years before I was born, so that when we met in this timeline, they would assist me in deprogramming them, broadening the worldview. Like the consequence of this life and age is far more than we bargained for. Like there's a lot more going on. I think everybody could agree with that. Like there's a lot more going on.
There's definitely a lot more going on. And I think we live very individualistically, where it's just like, it's just me, this here right now. But you're saying it's cosmically bigger.
It's cosmically bigger. And part of my assignment, I believe, was in the pre-Adamic age, was focused on what I would call the Lurianic Kabbalistic tree of life as a cosmic structure and a counterfeit creative template. It was like in the pre-Adamic age, they had already begun to assemble that structure, and it's been mapped in the physical world. And that's what Jewish mysticism is based on, is that Kabbalah tree, that structure, which is a counterfeit creative template. And the basis of some of the highest level ritual magic there is actually a pre-Adamic cosmic structure that already existed before people started getting initiated into Babylonian mysteries on this side of the age.
Okay, so what David alluded to there was how they talked about, they used the word deliverance, and Nathan also used the word deliverance. There are certain people that have the ability. David went into great depth with his. Nathan didn't speak much if he had a role in it or not, but he knows of it. But David talked about how with his ministries and how they bring people to deliverance. If it could be from trauma, and it could actually be from demonic possession or influence. They help people break free from that. Um, so, but what he was alluding to there is where they were trying to do this all the way back in the pre-Adamic times, where there were people that had that fragmented souls, and they were even doing this back then, and they were actually going out for deliverance and trying to bring these people back, kind of save them and bring them back to God. Okay, so now we're going to get into our next segment. Well, this is the first segment, the Anunnaki and the fallen angels, and who were the Anunnaki, an ancient Sumerian perspective. So, ancient Mesopotamian deities described as divine rulers controlling human fate. Um, in reality, what they really were they're saying that they were ETs that came from a planet called Nibiru, but they very well could have been fallen angels, because a lot of what's talked about with them, and as we go through here, we're going to find out that they match up a lot with even some Greek and Roman mythology as to who these people were. Okay, so then they have like the epic. This is what's interesting, though. The Epic of Gilgamesh. It references them as gods of the underworld and deciding human destinies. Okay, so here, this is them again, and what we see here, um, they look like there's some mixture of different animals here, like a humanish type head, like maybe a horse body and some wings, and they look a little different. But they were referencing this stuff back in carvings and drawings and things back then. Okay, so now we're going to take and kind of look at a quick biblical perspective.
There's a lot of teachings on.
One second. About basically about like angels and demons. Do they actually war in the second heaven? And we'll talk about what the second heaven is, where it could be. There's really nobody has a solid on that, but we can actually have some ideas. Okay, so here we go with Tony Merkel and another guest talking about angels and demons warring in the second heaven.
There's a lot of teachings on third heaven, second heaven, first heaven. I know Paul talks about being taken up to the third heaven. And outside of that, I don't know if there is an actual biblical finding of what the first and second heaven is. We have years of theological discussions and theologians, sharing their thoughts, and the first heaven, what that could be. The first heaven's here, or first heaven is the sky above us. The second heaven, cosmos. But I hear different perspectives. Right. Everybody lands on third heaven, where God resides. Is it possible, in your mind, your perspective, that when somebody dies and they're going to appear before God, they have to go from the first heaven here through the second heaven to get to the third heaven, and the hijacking happening in the second heaven where the spiritual warfare is happening? Because in my perspective, like Daniel 10, when Daniel starts praying to receive understanding of the vision, the spirit prince of Persia interferes with the responding angel. All that whole scene interaction, in my mind, from my perspective, happened in the second heaven, this spiritual realm where these things happen. The warfare is happening. That's my perspective, and I'm open to be changed on
I might have to steal that. I like that. Well, because there's a lot of times. So somebody is entering into their experience. Their soul leaves their body. They'll have an out of body experience where they're typically sort of here on Earth momentarily able to interact with their environment. Sometimes it's like very brief. Other times people like, didn't even realize I was dead. I tried to pet my dog. I tried to turn the light on and my hands went through everything. Jim Woodford's a good friend of mine. He talks about how he went out to look at a field on his property and he had taken some drugs. He overdosed. It's a longer story, but then he's like, man, that must've worked. I felt so much better. And he gets out of his truck and he turns around and looks back and he's like, there's somebody like passed out over the steering wheel of my truck. I'm gonna go give that guy a piece of his mind. And then you realize, oh crap, that's me. Like he didn't even realize he was dead. So people enter into this out of body experience, and then they'll tend to either start, being raised up towards the sky, seeing a light or a tunnel, and that seems to be like a threshold where they would cross over maybe into that second heaven. A lot of people share stories where once they go through the light and the tunnel, so they've crossed the veil, so to speak, sometimes they'll come to a place where, like Randy saw angels and demons kind of warring over him until he entered into the next part of his experience. I've had people describe coming to a place where it looks lush and heavenly one direction and stark and brown grass and nasty, and there's a pit the other direction. And so people do often describe coming to some kind of a liminal in-between space where often there are demonic creatures and angels. I think that idea of sort of an in-between, like a second heaven in between earth and the place where God dwells, is very likely, at least with the many accounts I've heard.
Okay, so what's interesting about that, when he was explaining it, what I'm viewing in my mind, if any of you have ever seen the show called Stranger Things, I believe it was on Netflix, that they had what they called the Upside Down, and it was basically a carbon copy of what we have here, except it was dark and just kind of gloomy. The trees weren't full of leaves. They looked like they were dying, or they were like frozen in like mid-death. Things were they looked like here, and it was like here, but it wasn't quite here. It was just different. And we've heard a lot of people describe about this second heaven as being like the upside down. But at the same time, that's where you have your angels, the good angels, God's angels, warring with the fallen angels and the demons. And most times, what they're actually warring over, and it's over the people. But say, for example, you're like in a lucid dream, and you go to this place. Now, we talked about lucid dreaming in another show, but basically what it is a lucid dream is where you actually have some control of what you are doing within the dream. You can walk over to someplace, say, I want to walk over to that table, and you walk over to the table, and you could pick up an object and look at it, like look at a picture or something. But the the difference between that and a regular dream is, a regular dream, you're just going with the flow of what the dream is. You have the feelings, but you're not reacting to anything. You can't really do anything except maybe wake up. But in the lucid dream, you can actually interact with your environment. And in the lucid dream is where like these demons can come and interact with you. Um, in one case, there was a guy that um, he was in a lucid dream, and he was younger. He was in his early teens. I think he was like 13 or 14. And he went into this lucid dream, and he was confronted by this well-dressed, good-looking man, and said, "Hey, I want you to come to work for me." And the kid was like, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And this person was telling him, "Well, yeah, I got some things. I want to make you nice and strong, and you'll be able to do anything you want." The younger kids are more susceptible to that because they're thinking, "Oh, geez, I can do things like a superhero." So they'll say yes, and what they said yes to is they just said yes to a demon, um, and they are now in that the service of that demon. Um, and in this case of this one kid, he didn't have to go do any crazy stuff. He was just told by, and this entity happened to be Baal. His role was that he had to go to a certain place. He would be told, okay, you're going to go here. You have to be here at this time. Be there or else. And he was always threatened, be there or else. So he'd go there. And what it turned out to be is he was a key that allowed a portal to open that would be in that area. Now, portals float around like bubbles, they move. And that could also be how we have some missing people in certain places, is that maybe they weren't abducted, or maybe they just happened to walk into a portal, didn't know they walked into one, and then couldn't find their way back out. Or maybe they did later, and who knows. But so anyway, the some people are recruited that way in a lucid dream, and they don't even know it, either because they're young or they don't know or whatever. But the point is that it happens, and that is how they get you. So now we're gonna kind of get into more of a biblical perspective of fallen angels and the Nephilim. And let's see here. I got this here because it depicts DNA and the elongated skull, which would be like the Nephilim, and it's got the Tower of Babel there. Um, so Genesis 6:4 talks about Nephilim being the offspring of divine beings and humans, and we talked about that on Saturday's show, and you can go back and watch that if you want. So they basically mirroring the Anunnaki myths. Okay, and then we are talking about like the book of getting into the book of Enoch, and they talked about the 200 watchers that descended and taught humans forbidden knowledge and corrupted creation. So, and this is basically what they did um, in like Sodom and Gomorrah, where that was like the major one. That's why God totally destroyed that city by fire. So then Revelation 12:7-9 talks about a war in heaven, and that's where these watchers, or these, well, mainly Satan first, but then all of his angels that followed him were all expelled from heaven and basically sent down to earth. And the earth was Satan's domain, okay, for that time. And it reinforces the idea of ancient supernatural rulers. So that that was when they came down, and they continued to do their deeds, whatever they did. But at some point, then they get put away. So now we're going to go into segment two in the rewriting history and controlling time. I'm going to run another quick video clip here, and this is going to be interesting because we're going to move a little forward in time, but we're going to show that even in this video is like from the 1800s. And we're going to play it, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that we see there.
Area was everywhere, and history as we know it has been completely fabricated. At first we thought maybe the Dark Ages were just unclear, but it turns out they were invented to push a lot of events further into the past. We realized that it wasn't just small parts of history that might be wrong, everything was made up. One fascinating thing is the architecture we find around the world. In almost every city you'll find ancient Gothic-style buildings with incredibly intricate designs. People look at them and say, oh, that's just how they built things back then. But some of these buildings are absolutely stunning. Think about it. If we lived in a feudal society where everyone was working just to survive, how would anyone have had the time, resources, or motivation to build something so elaborate and that worked the way they did? These buildings weren't just practical structures like free energy generators, they were artistic expressions. They were built to be functional and beautiful, to celebrate what was being created. But we don't build like that anymore. The complexity and beauty of these structures are clues that we didn't live in the same pay-to-survive system we're trapped in now. Tartaria was a global civilization, incredibly advanced and powered by free energy, likely based on etheric energy. It existed up until about 200 or 250 years ago. Estimates place its early origins around the mid-17th century, and its destruction came shortly after. They've been lying to you all along.
Crazy. Okay, so we're talking about architectural proof of an older civilization. They showed a lot of the old world buildings in there, which that in that video is from the 1800s. Okay, there are people out there, and I'm kind of a believer of it now too, that they had some type of AI, and they also had, well, something very similar to what we call um, Photoshop, where they're actually in there and they're changing things around, changing images. So let's talk about some of the things that we noticed in the video. There's electricity, there's moving sidewalks, there's like hovercraft, um, all this really cool technology. Electricity, the buildings were lit up. But the other thing that I noticed though is that the roads are all well-groomed dirt. Okay. So I believe that all of these buildings and all of that technology was found and it was dug out from the mud and people figured out how to use it and they started using it. But they say that these buildings were founded in a certain date, which and every time you go back and look at the founding dates on these, they were like in the 17 or 1800s, but the 1700 buildings are the ones in Europe. Okay, so what we're seeing is that systematically over time, a lot of this was destroyed. A lot of that technology was hidden or just disappeared. We know that in the past, like 3 to 4 decades, people have created gas engines that could get like 80 miles to the gallon, and that technology was taken away. They weren't allowed to have it, and people died for technology like that. Okay, so you think for a moment. This is going to be something that might ring a bell in your head. What year did your state that you live in actually become a state, a part of the United States, an actual state? Okay, where I used to be from, Wisconsin, it was 1848. Okay, um, a lot of the stuff that we see in these in these videos was pre Wisconsin becoming a state. So some of these other states came much later, but other states, of course, came much earlier. Okay, so now we're going to talk about like some of these buildings, and we're going to go through a little series of video or of images here. Um, so we'll talk about the pyramids of Egypt and the Sphinx. The Sphinx now they're saying is much older than the pyramids actually, because they can see water erosion on it. So then we're talking about like megaliths like Göbekli Tepe. Okay, did I pronounce that right? I think you all got the right idea. Okay, and then we've got these cathedrals like St. Patrick's. Okay, so you look at this cathedral. This building is still standing today. Just starting at the very bottom, look at the entryways and the doors. The doors are made for somebody that's 2 to 3 times taller than we are. Okay, and then I wanted to quick play a quick video for you, and then we're gonna talk about what these buildings were actually used for. And this video is gonna kind of give it away a little bit. And there is no audio to this. It's just going to show you just the pictures, and it's going to highlight certain areas in red. These are receptors or antennas. So it was basically back in their day, it was like Wi-Fi. It collected energy, okay, the ether from the air. The first or second video up there, it says 1 through 7, for the lost history of the flat Earth. And I'm not trying to push flat Earth, but a lot of this information is covered more in depth in that video. It's about a 5 hour and 15-minute video, and it's broken up into 7 chapters, so it's easy to find your way around. I guarantee you, if you've got about 5 or 6 hours where you're not doing anything, say like, think of the old Sunday matinee, sit down and watch this video, and you'll glean a lot from it. It's really good. But here again, we see all these like antennas or receptors. They were for collecting energy and producing electricity wirelessly. This is the kind of stuff that Tesla talked about. And we had it back in the 1800s. And then it was taken away. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. see where we're at here. Well, we'll talk about um, what were these buildings made for. So we know that they were power centers of some type, um, and they 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 harnessed the etheric energy from the air. And most of these buildings, like the cathedrals, they were they were places of healing, not places of worship. So you, back in that day, um, all of these buildings, it was run off of the electricity that was created from the ether. These buildings all had like organs, all the big pipe organs, and they were all set like ran at a frequency, and then they had bells. Okay, when's the last time you actually seen a bell tower with a bell in it? If there are some, there aren't many, and most of them reside on some of the New World churches that are here today, not from the Old World. Okay, but these bells were certain frequencies. The frequency was like 432 hertz, and that's supposed to be a healing frequency, but that was changed to like 400 or 440, which is not so good for you, and that's what the music industry is putting in our music these days. So I watched recently episode 126 on my lunch break on YouTube. Um, it talks about no toilets in the old world. And when I first saw that, I go, "What in the heck is he talking about? What could he? Why would he want to talk about like no toilets and that people that lived in the log cabins had to run to the outhouse?" Well, I now that I think about it, it's a pretty interesting way. It actually grabbed me and got me to watch it. So, but that's where he got to talking about that these buildings weren't meant to, for you to spend a long amount of time in them. It was mainly to go walk in, walk a circuit, and there are circuits in the floor. It's amazing how um, even some of our circuitry in computers and other electronics today look like some of the circuits that are in the floors of some of these old world buildings. But healing, some of the other buildings that look like castles or yeah, mainly fortified castles, these were made the electricity. But not only did the electricity run the power, but it ran through the waters. When you look at, they had a lot of waterways and like star forts back then too. So you had all these waterways running through, and that power went through the water. It made the water like a, they called it like a living water, stagnant water. And he talks about in that episode 126, stagnant water in your toilet, if it sits there for days, actually becomes toxic. Okay, stagnant water is toxic. Running water is living water because it's getting oxygen. With these cathedrals, especially the cathedrals, because we've been able to find, and mainly them, but I'm verifying right out underground beneath these cities, here in the United States, and especially so like in Italy, um, in the UK. I think we're seeing it like in Hungary and Russia. A lot of Eastern European countries that still have these a lot of these old world buildings. Russia and Hungary especially, they're all still there. But we're seeing the catacombs, and they've opened the catacombs up to where you pay an admission and you can go on a tour. But what we're finding out too, that bone um, is a resonator as well. Okay, so these buildings were made out of marble and limestone and granite, and each of these things, they have quartz and different crystal that's in some of the stone, and it resonates at certain frequencies. Okay, so um, what is happening now is you've got when basically when they had the whole the deluge. We'll get into that too, and actually when was the flood of the Bible? Because most people think when the flood happened, there really wasn't much on the earth then anyway. That civilization was still pretty young. Well, you got to rethink that. Okay, just look at the difference of 960 years back from what it is today, And Noah lived for 960 years. So when we go back and we start looking over time on how much civilization from Noah's time, 960 years could have been made, we're going to have quite a few people. Okay, we're probably going to have, and a lot of these big cities and these buildings were being built back then, even before the flood. Okay, so and then back on the cathedrals with the bones being resonators too, but the resonation is not as positive. And here we are going and sitting in church for 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half, depending on if you're there for Easter Mass, Christmas Mass, or whatever you're there for. A regular Sunday Mass is usually shorter, 45 minutes, but you're going in there and you're getting resonated with with the bad resonation rather than what it was originally meant to be, was for healing. I think you get my point. So, so we're going to go a lot deeper in this in future episodes, but you know, you think about what's underneath all these buildings today, especially the bones, lots of them, and it's not. I mean, it's going to be in places where you never thought they would be. Okay, and then you want to know what we're wondering, who put them there. These aren't regular grave sites or cemeteries. These are actual tunnels, catacombs with the bones stacked in an artistic way. So they were put that way. Who did it, and where did all these bones come from? This just wasn't. We're talking millions of bodies, and they're basically using skulls, femurs, you know, some of your long bones and skulls. I don't think they use too much of the hip bones, and they aren't using rib bones. I don't know what they did with the rest of the body, but it's pretty macabre if you ask me. All right, so let's move on. So are timelines fabricated? I would say yes, in the way that the timelines are written. Um, there are some out there that believe that our actual timeline that we're running on in like a quantum way can also be changed, but we're not going to go there right now. But we're going to basically talk about our timeline, saying from a such and such date, pre-Adamic, say like going back to when they first started talking about the Watchers, just before Noah came into the picture. Okay, and that would have been around the time of Enoch. Okay, so we're going to start there and we go up to today and this timeline. How many years was that really? Okay, so we know if we go back 2,000 years, 2,025 years back from today, around that time was the time Jesus Christ walked the earth. But, um, and I hope a lot of Christians, which I'm one, aren't going to be like, oh, what you're saying is heresy. It's a, but when you read the Bible, it doesn't give any specific dates on anything. The only thing that it mentions, the closest thing to dates, is it mentions how long a person lived. Okay, so if we know for real when a certain person died, if it would have been like uh, 25 AD or something like that, if we have something like that, we could probably start putting a timeline together. But I think it was purposely left out because I think it was left up to us to find out the truth. And I think, and I'm already over the fence on this. I'm not on the fence anymore. I believe that the timeline that we're living in now and the history that we've been taught our entire lives, okay, for everybody that's still alive on the earth today, going back, say, 120 years, prior to that, there's probably nobody on earth. I mean, Social Security says there's like 200-year-old people on the earth, but unless you're the old entity that's been around for a millennia, humans don't live that long anymore. Okay, so there's nobody here that's going to remember a timeline. So, in my best guesstimation, from what I can gather, I think 1776, and possibly even with some new revelations more recently of the year 1607 when the first settlers came to Roanoke, Virginia. Okay, that was around the time when we had people start coming here and they started finding these buildings that were already here. I mean, when was the first time we even, after coming here, that we actually got to California, what we know as California today? And there are pictures from the 1800s of vast open areas, dirt streets, but you got these Gothic buildings standing there. Okay? Excuse me. So I think, yes, I think the timelines have been rewritten, and I think they did it in a way slowly over time to where when they got to a certain point, there wouldn't be any memory of anybody pre 300 years ago. Okay? So I think our timeline has been rewritten in and around 1776, and even into the 1800s. A lot of the destructions and a lot of these old world buildings were being destroyed all the way up through World War II. Okay, so a lot of these buildings were being destroyed then. They're being destroyed now, saying that they're unstable. They're cracking and breaking apart. So they're rewriting history not only with the buildings, but they're hiding technology from us, and they're hidden our true history, where we really came from. Um, so it's asking here, with the Sumerian kings list. Okay, I think. All right, let me go back over to my other screen. I have a Sumerian kings list image here. All right, so the Sumerian kings list. Interesting stuff here. Um, this just lists some of the things about it, but the kings of Sumer prior to the flood had outrageously long reigns. They lived for 20 to 30,000 years. Actually, after Adam and Eve um, got busted for eating the forbidden fruit, God said that our lives would be 120 years. Okay, but there were still people that lived long. Okay, so the most complete list is a prism with four sides, two columns on each side. Many fragments of the King's List have been found, but there are a lot that are being hidden from us. Okay, and even the full um, Sumerian King's List, the actual book. Okay, so Sumer is the earliest known civilization. That was the first one written, but we know due to pre-Adamic and what the Bible says about the Watchers, and this is in the Enoch days of Enoch and even prior to Enoch, that there was full civilizations then, and things going on that didn't please God. Okay, and this went on for a while until then he had to bring Noah, and then he had to flood the earth. But again, we're talking about timelines, and when did the biblical timeline actually happen? Some people think that 5 or 6 thousand years ago is when we had Enoch, and then 900 or 800 years later was Noah, and so on and so forth. So it's it's very cloudy, and unless we can actually get a date of an actual person from back then and how long, when it was that they died, we would actually be able to put a real timeline together. Real Bible scholars could do it. So the point that I wanted to bring about this is that the Sumerian kings list in like the Epic of Gilgamesh has some accounts that are very similar to what happened in the Bible. The other thing that is very interesting about the Epic of Gilgamesh, the full story, not the one that we get now, is they talk about a plant that they ate back then that would give you long life. This you would eat. It was kind of like an elixir of life, and it was a plant. Something very simple is just you could grow it in your garden and eat it, and then you could live, 30, 40,000 years unless somebody stuck a sword in you. So, interesting stuff there. We'll dive a little bit more into that later. Um, let's see. We did that one. All right. So now we're going to talk about historical resets and lost civilization. So did they erase past ages to keep their control hidden? And I would say emphatically yes. Okay. We have proof in a lot of these old world buildings, and much of what we're finding buried underground. I mean, most recently they did the sonar radar stuff on the Gaza pyramids, and they're finding that there is a huge complex of columns and coils and another giant building way down, like 2,000 meters down. So we know about that, and we know about all the tunnels that not just under the cities that connect the old world buildings to the old world buildings, but there we already know that even with Elon Musk's boring machine, that they're boring tunnels under cities going from one city to another. And I would also say emphatically yes, that there are tunnel systems that have been dug that traverse the whole Earth. Okay. Um, so you might think that I'm like picking at straws here, but just in my research, I've got so much in my head that when I try to bring some of it out, like at the moment, I get brain freeze. That's why I've got 5 pages of notes that I have to do for the show. So we're digging this stuff up. And then again, I would propose that our current timeline or our written history that we know about started around 1776, maybe around 1800, I think 1776. Um, and I think that possibly the deluge or this mud flood, the flood of the Bible, probably happened somewhere between well, maybe not 300, but up around maybe 800 years ago. Okay, so it's a lot closer to us in our timeline than what a lot of people would believe, like from the Bible. Okay, so now we're going to get into segment 3, and this is the mud flood and a more recent reset, and that's a question mark. Okay, so a biblical flood versus a mud flood. Okay, so the Bible states that God would only flood the earth once, yet cities are buried under the mud. In the 1800s, they suggest another catastrophe, or was it the same? Maybe it was just before the 1800s, or even 300 years before. We didn't start having people come here supposedly until 1607 when they went to Roanoke, Virginia. And the whole Christopher Columbus thing, the 1492 and all that, I don't even believe that Christopher Columbus was a real person. I think that was another fabricated part of history. And we'll talk about that later too. Okay, so we have all these photographs from the 1800s that show cities being excavated from the mud. Okay, so let's see here. I want to get back to my spot. Here we go. So here's an old world building, and then they were digging out from the mud, and we're seeing that there's a whole new floor, if you will, down below, and then you hit the foundation of the building. So a portion, at least one floor of that building was buried under the mud. Okay, and then we get to here. So I believe this is Delaware. I think Delaware Street, maybe not Delaware. It could be in California. But if you look at here, you see the buildings here and the mud coming all the way up to the side of the building. They're digging these buildings out from the mud. And if you look, I don't know if you probably can't see my cursor, but if you look to the building all the way to the right, right next to where my small camera is, and you'll see the top of the mud there, and really only one floor and a very small portion of the next floor down's windows were showing. We had 2 full stories underground, at least that we can see there. Okay, so here we go again. We got these other old world buildings, and then they're built on top of other much older world buildings that are underneath. Okay, they you can see where they dug this out. So there's still more underneath, and a lot of times you wonder how far down does it go. Okay, and then the railway system. This right here I found very interesting because this is one I've got another photo where there's railroad tracks that run right up to one of the big old world buildings that looks like it could be maybe not a Capitol building, but it could be like an imperial type building, but it had rail and in both pictures they were digging the tracks out of the mud. Okay, so the tracks were buried. So what this made me do is think about the eastern and western coast railroads where they had the race to the middle of the country to see who could make it there first, to get the railway from coast to coast hooked up, and all the slave labor that went into it, the Chinese, all the Chinese people that they brought over that died, laying tracks. My question, and then the old stories, the myths about John Henry pounding the spikes for the tracks and laying the rails. They may have had to replace some, but I'm now in the mindset that the slave labor, these men had shovels and they had them digging these tracks out. Okay, so and these tunnels that went through the mountains, they didn't blow those tunnels. They just redug out parts of the mud flood that slid over the side where the tracks ended, and they're like, huh. So they started breaking away at that and broke through the mud that dried into more like a stone, a soft stone. They broke through it. Um, so, do you think that these structures were intentionally buried to hide the pre-flood technology and and the knowledge of that technology? If they were, how do you think it was done? Okay, so these are some questions that I pose that maybe later we can look into these and maybe come up with some answers. I think that there back then, okay, we know that we had high advanced technology, okay, and I'm going to kind of refer over to a Telegram channel that I read fairly often, and they mention Tartaria a lot. Okay, they talk about how vast the Tartarian Empire was, that it covered pretty much the whole world, everywhere. But then they talked about that there were a red faction and a white faction, and it's interesting how um, these two different factions were described. So we'll talk about the white faction first, and that would be like your good guys, and the videos that I showed you that have where they were hundreds and probably before, where they had this technology and they used it for good. They used these buildings as resonators to keep their health good and to purify their bodies. Whereas the red faction are the parasites that we know of and the ones that are actually running the world today. The people that are trying to keep us from finding out where we came from, the true knowledge, our true past. And they give us a little bit of technology back, a little at a time, a little at a time. And then pretty soon they're probably going to take, and this is what they talk about in the Telegram channel that I look at, is at some point they're going to go through and do another harvest. And what they mean is they're going to harvest us, and that's what we've been here for. It was basically a harvest for them and for their little creatures that live below ground. And we go back on the Bible on that, and it talks about all these creatures that are in the end times and during the Armageddon, of the creatures that are going to be coming out of the ground. And I think a lot of we're going to get into some other stuff here, but are all the earthquakes that we've been experiencing, especially here in the United States over the past couple of years, they're very low. They're only 4 to 6 kilometers deep. I think that it was our military and possibly other allied militaries that were all working in conjunction to blow up the deep underground military bases that were used as labs and to take out any of these chimera hybrids and all this other crap that they were working on down there. And if I can go ahead and say so, I probably will. The whole thing that's going on with Russia and Ukraine, it's the same thing, okay? Um, but we're going to get into that on a Saturday show. All right, um, so we were thinking, so if we think this was truly the Great Flood and it was closer to us in history than we were taught, then we have God's hands removing all living flesh except for Noah and his family. There's a lot to think about and deduce, but we have to have the evidence. We just need to put these puzzle pieces together properly. So I think one of the easiest ways to do it is if we could start to pinpoint some things and work on possibly making a timeline. That would be something that there's a few people out there that I would like to work with on maybe doing that at some point, and then do a live stream on that. And I'm sorry about the phone ringing in the background. That is my bat phone message. I probably have some important stuff coming in, but I'm almost done, so it can wait. All right, so now we're going to get into segment 4 on orphan trains and repopulation and how they repopulated. Okay, I'm going to just focus on what they did here in the United States, not so much what they did in the UK. And the whole Cabbage Patch Kid thing we're going to get into later, because we're gonna dig into orphan trains and get rid of the railroad tracks. And so here we have an actual photograph of an orphan train from the early 1800s. Okay. So basically what they had, thousands of children were shipped across the country and placed in empty empty cities, a sign of depopulation after an engineered event is what I'm thinking. But all these children were relocated, and it wasn't just here in the United States. There's even stories of how a lot of these orphan kids were sent to Australia and to other countries. So, and then it's like, okay, well, where did they all come from? Well, um, the parents of these kids. Let me get into here. So we have like infant incubators. This here is a photo from the mid 1800s, and this is at a World's Fair. And I don't remember where this one was actually taken, but there were a few World Fairs. Chicago World Fair was one. They had a few of them, but the interesting thing is after these World Fairs were over, they tore down all those buildings. Why would they do that? So they have these incubators, and here's a wide view of some of the incubators back. This is now back in the 1800s. Okay, that they had these incubators that they had these small babies in. So why would okay, so you have a newborn baby. Unless it was born too early, it wouldn't need to be in an incubator. It would just need to be with its mom or be be taken care of and fed and everything. So if they're in an incubator, why is it in an incubator? Is this telling us without telling us that they're cloning these babies, or maybe they had like in vitro type technology back then that they were growing? These are test tube babies. They called them. Always talked about incubator babies with live babies. Okay, so this is the explanation for a good portion of these young kids. Okay, so they basically had young mothers. They were taking the children away from them. And, of course, that's going to break mom's heart. She's going to go a little crazy. So they're going to put mom in an insane asylum. They put dads there too. But what they did, though, is these women were still a breeding age, so they still bred them, had babies, and they were making more babies that way. And just these women just became breed in vitro technology that they had. Parents had their children taken from them, and they were put in insane asylums, and they were basically became breeding machines. The children were taken all over the world, and put with other families that either played the game or were young enough and didn't recollect the past. Okay, so was this a global reset to ensure that no one would remember what came before? I think so, because if you think back, we talk about the wartime. Here's something from World War One. Okay, they were already they were killing millions of people, bombing these buildings, and basically erasing history. Already starting in World War One. Okay, so as we go, then we were talking about, we got World War One and we got World War Two, and what do you see? More destruction of these old world buildings and killing off of the civilian population. I to be honest with you, I don't know how many civilians were killed during World War One or World War Two. I think I can find it. We can look it up, but it's been in our face just recently about the war going on between Russia and Ukraine. Okay, I'm just going to come fast forward a bit, and I think we have some of this stuff going on there. Bombing going on in both places, and they've said that both countries have lost in excess of 1.8 million soldiers each. And that's not including the civilians on both sides that are dying. Okay? So we're having a population eradication, and I think they're bombing out some more of these buildings. Okay? So I believe that if there was a civilization that existed before the mud flood, those that were in power at that time wanted to also remove any remaining witnesses. So they did that in the two phases, World War One and World War Two. There were other places, and I think maybe Vietnam and the Korean War might have been a little bit different, but I think all these wars are for money, number one, but they don't care about the lives. Okay, so when we go back and talk about the catacombs and about how many bones are down in these catacombs that stretch, the whole circumference and the underneath of a city. Take the Vatican or even in other places where they got these big cathedrals, it takes up a lot of acreage, and that's millions and millions and millions of bodies. Okay, so now we're going to go into segment 5, and we're going to talk about their end game. Okay, so we're getting kind of near the end here, and their end game, and I'm just going to go. I'm not even going to put the other picture up. It's just kind of a picture. So if these entities have controlled rulers, rewritten history, and suppressed knowledge, what is their ultimate goal? It's all has to do with power and just being in charge. Their power trip. Okay. But we're going to think back to an earlier video clip of taking soul fragments from people and using them in other entities or humans. Now, when we go to think about that, then we're like, okay, so not everything is taking place here on our side of the veil. Okay, it's going on the other side of the veil in other realms that might be in or adjacent to our timeline. So not only are they messing with our timeline and us, they're messing with any other timelines that might at some point where we're all supposed to converge into one timeline, and that is when everything is supposed to be back to good again. So are they preparing for their reemergence? Are there signs and symbols that suggest they never truly left? So I'm just going to read this. I wrote this out. We're seeing an increase in people reporting UFOs, now called UAPs, a huge increase in people reporting encounters with cryptids like Sasquatch, Dogman, pale white crawlers, and ETs/demons. More people are reporting being abducted or report an attempted abduction. And if you look at the news today, there are so many reports of people doing very heinous things. Just more recently, some guy in a suburb of Los Angeles with a human arm eating the meat off of a human arm, and did they probably killed that person too? There's a lot of murders going on, a lot of abductions. You think about Just in the United States every year, 800,000 kids go missing every year. Okay? What's happening there? What's that for? Okay? So if you look to the news today, which I usually tell people avoid spending too much time watching the mainstream media, but we're getting all these reports of these people doing, and it seems like they only want to report the bad stuff, okay? Just like last week we had that fertility clinic getting bombed, okay? Many people are saying that it's only going to get worse. So these are people that look into what is going on. Um, some people that really delve into the end times and with biblical prophecy and things like that. They think that it's going to happen for, for a lot longer, and it's going to get worse. And we just take and look at Ukraine and Russia, for example. Here we thought maybe that was going to come to an end, and I don't see an end to that for another year, year and a half, maybe a little bit longer. So I just don't think there's any end in sight. But um, there has been a change since I wrote this with India and Pakistan both trading jabs with each other. They kind of are in peace talks right now, thanks to President Trump. Okay, there is a rumor through a lot of the people that are doing the research and whether it be biblical prophecy or just looking at what's happening in the world, that this increase in the dark days is going to continue until like 2027. So we still got a couple more years of this. And that's going to bring us to the biblical end times and prophecy. Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So if Noah's world was corrupted by fallen angels, and we're seeing history repeat before our eyes, and I think we are, if you don't know your true history and the mistakes of the past, we're bound to repeat them until we get it right. And I think that's why they keep erasing the history and making us have to go through this over and over and over and over again. These are some sadistic entities. They thrive on pain and fear. So I believe, though, right now that we are truly in the Great Awakening. So we have an untold number of people that are slowly waking up to the truth, or at the very least starting to question things. This leads to a search for knowledge and then realization. So in closing, the truth behind the lie and lifting the veil, the goal of this podcast tonight isn't to convince you of anything that I've said, but to challenge you to make us question the official version of history. What were these entities hiding? Are there actually entities that are in charge and doing this? I think so, yeah. What knowledge did ancient civilizations possess that we no longer do? So I think a lot of this stuff, we're still going to be digging stuff out, but a lot of this stuff, they've just destroyed it. And we probably, unless we can find a book or a tablet someplace that has it carved in that says, hey, this is how you make this, we're probably not going to know for a very long time how to redo some of this stuff. So the other thing I want to do is encourage critical thought. So this is just the beginning. So the deeper that we dig, the more that we uncover. And I hope that you guys stick with me every week here on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And more keep coming and coming and coming, so we can kind of lift that veil together and kind of try to find out the true history and why, where we really came from together. So I would like all of you to keep your heads on a swivel, be aware of your surroundings, be safe, and I want to God bless everyone out there that's watching on the other side of this screen. So we'll see you next Saturday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central in the U.S., and then back here again next Wednesday at 8 o'clock p.m. Y'all take care. God bless.